From early childhood, we recognize ourselves in the mirror without a second thought. That image becomes the anchor of who we think we are. A fixed, central, unchanging I. But what if that image is the first trap of illusion? What if the I you believe in is nothing more than a reflection skimming the surface of a far deeper consciousness? Deepak Chopra presents a simple yet unsettling idea. The I is not real. It's a mental construct, an illusion so convincing that it governs every thought, emotion, and decision. And yet, it is just that, an illusion. Poet William Blake hinted at this truth when he described the mind-forged manacles, invisible chains we accept without question. The I is one of those chains. It limits us, defines us, controls us, but it doesn't have to. A child first recognizes themselves in the mirror at around 18 months old. Before that moment, there is no visual self-identity. That spark of recognition seems harmless, even charming, but it marks the beginning of something much bigger, the birth of the ego. That internal voice that soon begins to say, I want, I need, I am. From then on, the ego never stops. It takes shape through language, learned behavior, and social expectation. It becomes a constant editor of reality, crafting a narrative in which we're always the central character. Even when the story brings pain, Chopra reminds us, no one sees the same reality. 100 people watching the same sunset won't see the same sky. For a calm mind, it's sublime. For a depressed one, it's meaningless. Perception is filtered through the eye, turning experience into something deeply subjective. This subjectivity isn't limited to sunsets or emotions. It's woven into everything we experience: art, politics, love, even memory. The eye becomes the lens through which we interpret life, filtering out anything that doesn't fit our personal narrative. Over time, the ego turns perception into a script. We don't just see, we assign meaning, project intentions, and make judgments, all to reinforce the identity we've been building since childhood. Think about the last disagreement you had. Chances are, the argument wasn't just about what was said, but about what it meant to you, how it threatened the identity the ego has worked so hard to preserve. This is why spiritual traditions around the world speak of dying to the self. It's not about destruction. It's about dismantling the illusion so that something more expansive can emerge. Without the illusion of the I, what's left isn't emptiness, it's freedom. Freedom from the need to always be right. Freedom from defending a fragile identity. Freedom to just be. And that is what makes Chopra's insight so radical. It doesn't ask you to add more to who you are. It invites you to strip everything away. And yet, we act as though there is one truth, one identity, ours. The ego feeds on this fiction. It falls in love with its reflection, much like certain animals, dolphins, elephants, great apes, who can recognize themselves in a mirror. But why do we recognize ourselves? And why are we so obsessed with that image? The answer lies in the emotional reward of having a self. When toddlers discover their identity, they radiate euphoric energy. It's the terrible twos. This is mine. Me first. Adorable, but also a warning. That same energy, if left unchecked, becomes the adult who demands attention, seeks approval, and fears rejection. Here lies the paradox. The ego helps us survive socially, but also causes most of our suffering. It convinces us we are this and nothing more, when in fact, we are unlimited consciousness trapped inside a limited character. The human mind has been trained to accept this limitation without question. But Chopra invites us to go beyond. What if the I you believe in is just an idea? What if letting go of that idea could free you from fear, attachment, and pain. This isn't merely a philosophical suggestion. It's an urgent call to recognize that the root of our inner and outer conflicts lies in clinging to a self-image that is, at its core, a beautifully convincing fiction. And like any fiction, it can be rewritten. The ego presents itself as your loyal ally. It tells you that without it, you wouldn't exist. It convinces you that it is you, your identity, your point of view, your personal defense. But there is a far deeper truth. The ego doesn't protect you. It sabotages you quietly from within. The trap is so sophisticated that even the desire to escape the ego is, in itself, an act of ego. As Deepak Chopra points out clearly, you cannot eliminate the ego with thought, because every thought that tries to destroy it comes from the ego itself. Like a snake biting its own tail, the ego survives by feeding on your attempts to transcend it. The apparent solidity of the self is a cumulative construction. Every experience you've lived, every emotion you've felt, every opinion you've adopted, each becomes a brick in the wall separating you from unfiltered reality. But here lies the crucial detail. Experience doesn't happen directly through the senses. It happens through the self that interprets it. Think of it this way. Two people eat the same vindaloo curry. One finds it unbearably spicy, unpleasant. The other, raised in Goa, tastes nostalgia, a journey home. The difference? It's not in the tongue or the stomach. It lies in the inner story that filters experience. The ego doesn't simply let you live. It must decide whether what you live is good or bad, worthy or unwanted, desirable or feared. And in this constant judgment, the ego builds its kingdom. Every time you reject one experience and cling to another, you're strengthening the self as the invisible master of perception. And as Chopra warns, this accumulation of experiences isn't freedom. It's a control system that fuels a constant sense of lack. That's why even spiritual ambition can be a trap. The ego is subtle. It disguises itself as a seeker, a meditator, a good person. It loves goals that promise transcendence because it secretly believes it will be the one to get enlightened. But the truth is, the ego can't be enlightened. It can only mimic awakening while clinging to control. You might dress your spiritual journey in purity, but if you're still measuring, comparing, striving, you're not free. You're performing ego in a new costume. And what's more, the ego thrives on identity, even the identity of being someone who is on a path. It says, I'm better than I was. I'm more aware now. But true awareness has no comparison, no measurement. It just is. That's the paradox. The ego cannot let go of itself, but awareness can see the ego, and in seeing, it loosens its grip. It's not just about likes or dislikes. The ego rests on deeper needs: safety, belonging, love, recognition. A child runs through the house, exploring the world with unstoppable curiosity. That same energy, over time, morphs into a compulsive quest for validation. Who am I if no one applauds me? What am I worth if I'm not desired? The ego always wants more, even when that more is just empty longing in disguise. William Wordsworth once wrote, "I wandered lonely as a cloud." There is beauty in the poem, but the loneliness of ego is not always poetic. For most of us, being utterly alone, without the shelter of the self that gives meaning, is terrifying. So we keep running towards distractions, achievements, fading pleasures. But the escape never ends, because ego has no end. There's always something new it wants, something it needs, something it fears losing. And here comes Chopra's most devastating line. The I doesn't have an agenda. The I is the agenda. That line says it all. It's not that the ego drives you towards certain goals. It's that you, while identified with it, are the endless program of wanting. The ego will never be satisfied because its function isn't fulfillment. It's desire itself. That's why you can have everything and still feel empty. That's why, as long as you're someone, you'll never feel like enough. Freedom from the ego isn't a fight, it's an awakening. But to awaken, you must first realize you've been asleep, dreaming a dream you call me. The ego is not modern. It wasn't born with civilization, nor with language, nor even with conscious thought as we know it. The roots of the self are far older. It's an evolutionary phenomenon that has been silently growing for millions of years, a consciousness that once looked at itself and was never the same again. Today, we use our names as if it were the most natural thing, but having a name is a historical conquest. The first written name we know belongs to an Egyptian pharaoh named Irihor. His title, the Mouth of Horus, dates back to 3,200 years before our era. Yet long before written language existed, the awareness of I had already emerged, primitive, raw, and profound. Before there were words, there was visual recognition. Have you ever wondered if our prehistoric ancestors looked into water and saw themselves? Did they know that figure staring back was their own? We can't pinpoint the exact moment when this began, but we do know the first mirrors, polished stones, obsidian, and metal, appeared only 8,000 years ago. Still, we're not the only species capable of self-recognition. Studies show that some animals, chimpanzees, gorillas, dolphins, elephants, even magpies, can identify themselves in a reflection. The test is simple. Place a pink hat on the animal's head. If it looks in the mirror and reaches for its own head, not the glass, it has passed the test. In other words, without speaking, it has said, "That is me." But here's what's even more fascinating. These species don't use mirrors in the wild. So why would their brains evolve the capacity for self-awareness? What's the evolutionary purpose of a self if there's no immediate need? The story becomes even more mysterious when we consider ancient art. Two of the earliest known human-like sculptures stand out. The Venus of Berekat Ram, found in the Golan Heights, and the Venus of Tantan, discovered in Morocco. They are both over 200,000 years old, sculpted not by Homo sapiens, but by Homo erectus, our evolutionary predecessor. These small figures do not represent animals or spirits. They represent a human body. They are, quite possibly, the first selfies in history. The mirror then becomes more than just a surface. It's a portal, a gateway through which the I steps out of instinct and into narrative. This evolution didn't happen overnight. It was shaped by countless small moments, gestures, choices, expressions of curiosity, each one slowly chiseling out a sense of self from the raw clay of nature. And once self-awareness took hold, something irreversible happened. We began to ask questions. Not just what is this, but who am I? Not just where do I go, but why am I here? Those questions may sound spiritual, even poetic, but they are the very engine of civilization. They gave rise to stories, rituals, symbols, and eventually, history. It's as if the ego, once born, started scripting the play of humanity, casting itself as the hero, the villain, the victim, and the god. Carved with crude lines marking a head, torso, and arms, these ancient sculptures express something profound, a consciousness that saw itself as separate, a shape, a form, a being. The act of creating an image of oneself is the first silent cry of ego in human history. Since then, that individual consciousness has not only survived, it has spiraled out of control. As Chopra puts it, the I has not only survived since prehistory, it has metastasized. We see it around us every day. Greed, the hunger for power, the obsession with standing out. They're not just flaws. They're ego unleashed, evolved, institutionalized. From absurd hoarding of wealth to wars driven by ideology, human history is the expansion of the ego, endlessly colliding with other egos. When we live through ego, the world instantly divides. Me versus you, us versus them. And so, from a sculpture carved in stone to a nuclear button, the I has shaped our choices, our tragedies, and our path to redemption. Maybe the real question isn't, when did the ego begin? But rather, when will we be ready to outgrow it? Humans are the only beings who chose to separate themselves from nature. It wasn't an accident, nor a response to urgent survival needs. It was a silent, profound decision, one that defined our evolutionary path. While other species dissolve into their environment, we began to dominate it. At the heart of this separation lies the ego. In the planet's most remote corners, like the interior of Antarctica, there exist isolated mountains known as nunataks, surrounded by endless fields of ice. There, in that frozen wilderness, lives a white bird called the snow petrel, Pagodroma nivea. Amid the desolation, it finds cracks in the rock to nest, guards a single egg, and when needed, flies more than 60 miles to the ocean for food. This creature does not choose its life. It lives as nature dictates. Humans, on the other hand, choose where and how to live. Despite our physical limitations, we have colonized deserts, glaciers, mountaintops, even underground cities. We did it not because our bodies allowed it, but because our minds demanded it. The I decided we were not part of the ecosystem, but its rulers. This illusion of control gave rise to something deeper, the myth of human exceptionalism. We began to believe that we were the pinnacle of life, the final product of evolution, detached from the very forces that shaped us. We built cities that defy gravity, machines that pierce the skies, and networks that span the globe. Yet in doing so, we forgot the silence of a forest, the rhythm of the tides, the sacred stillness of the stars. The ego didn't just separate us, it replaced wonder with ownership, and in claiming the world, we lost the wisdom of being part of it. That decision nearly cost us everything. According to archaeologist Curtis W. Marion, there was a period between 190,000 and 120,000 years ago when the human species nearly went extinct. The climate changed brutally. Extreme cold, drought, a shattered African continent. Only a small group survived on the continent's southern coast thanks to access to the sea and a capacity not of the body, but of the mind, consciousness. In his research at Pinnacle Point, Marion uncovered shellfish remains, stone tools, and signs of a mind able to track lunar cycles and predict tides. These humans didn't wait for nature to save them. They understood it, interpreted it, and adapted, consciously. That was the true revolution. We moved beyond instinct and became architects of our own reality. But this leap in consciousness came with a cost. We were no longer part of the river, the sky, the herd. We became something else, beings capable of saying I. As Chopra puts it, we have chosen to be separate. It's a trait of the species. That trait gave us power, yes, but it also disconnected us from the invisible web that unites all living things. We lost the sense of belonging to something greater. The ego in constructing its identity, shattered the mirror of unity into millions of individual fragments. And so, from a handful of humans trapped between ocean and desert, we were born, creatures who believe they are distinct, separate, superior. But that belief is not evolution. It is alienation. Now that we've conquered the outer world, are we ready to reconnect with the inner one? To stop living as strangers in a universe we've always belonged to? Maybe it's time to remember, we were never truly separate. We only believed we were. Reality isn't what you think it is. It never has been. Your mind silently edits every fragment of what you perceive, like a film director trimming scenes. Only what the ego approves survives. You don't see the world. You see what your mind decides to show you. Deepak Chopra puts it clearly. Our consciousness is so vast that, without filters, it would overwhelm us. If we didn't mentally crop our perceptions, we'd drown in information. From birth, the ego begins to build these filters. The process becomes so natural that we forget it's even happening. Picture this. You're in a parking lot full of cars. You can't process every vehicle, every face, every shadow. So what does your mind do? It focuses on one thing, your car. Everything else fades, as if it doesn't exist. That's not perception, it's editing. Animals do it too, though unconsciously. A penguin returning to a beach crowded with chicks finds its own. An Arctic fox hears the faint crunch of a mouse beneath the snow and leaps precisely. A monarch butterfly returns to the same forest in Mexico year after year. They don't choose, instinct chooses for them. We, on the other hand, do choose. And with that freedom comes a cost. To define who we are, we must also decide who we are not. We say, I am spiritual, and exclude thousands of philosophies. We say, I belong to this religion, and instantly ignore 4,200 others. The unsettling truth. The list of what we reject is far longer than what we accept. Identity is built through exclusion. As the ego filters, it also separates. It divides the world into me and not me, us and them. That division becomes belief, and belief becomes judgment. This act of filtering isn't just practical, it becomes existential. It tells you what matters and what doesn't, who deserves love and who doesn't, what is true and what should be ignored. Slowly, without noticing, we build a fortress of belief, guarded by habits of attention. And from within that fortress, we call it reality. But what if it's just comfort? What if everything you've labeled as irrelevant holds a piece of the truth you've been seeking? Many spiritual traditions warn against this narrowing of perception. They urge us to stay present, to observe without judgment, to let go of the editor. Because only in that raw, unfiltered awareness can something greater than the ego emerge. Not a better version of you, but the recognition that you were never the editor to begin with. A personal example, Chopra's son, Gotham, was a die-hard Boston Celtics fan. From a young age, he despised the Lakers. Why? Because his attention, and with it, his emotional identity, was aligned with one team, one narrative. Years later, after moving to Los Angeles and working near the Lakers, he faced inner conflict. Could he transform what was once not me into part of his self? As you might guess, that's never easy. Even in everyday life, this editing process is at work. Chopra recalls arriving in the United States during the physician shortage of the 1970s. Though doing the same work as his American colleagues, he encountered silent rejection, subtle judgments triggered simply by not being one of them. Their minds had already edited who he was. And this is the danger. When we edit reality to suit our preferences, we impoverish it. We close the door to new possibilities, other truths, the unknown. The ego doesn't want to expand its view. It wants to defend its territory. But human consciousness wasn't meant to live behind walls. Our power to focus attention is one of our greatest gifts. Where your attention goes, your energy follows. And where your energy flows, you create your reality. So the real question is, who decides what you pay attention to? If it's not you, it's the ego. And if it's the ego, then what you call reality is merely a cropped projection of the infinite. What if I told you that what you call control is just a well-crafted illusion of the ego? Throughout life, the ego becomes the silent administrator of our reality. It filters what we accept, what we reject, what we remember, and what we ignore. We don't experience reality as it is. We see what the ego allows us to see, and that version, however familiar, is deeply limited. Deepak Chopra puts it with striking clarity. We use consciousness like a supercomputer, yet only to send emails. Instead of exploring its infinite capacity, we reduce it to a narrow filter of judgments, memories, and repetitive habits. Consider those family gatherings during the holidays. The same conflicts, the same arguments, the same unresolved issues, over and over again. Time passes, yet emotions are recycled. The ego isn't looking for resolution. It wants to be right. It refuses to yield. It clings to the narrative it's built around you. We mistake repetition for safety, predictability for truth. But in reality, it's a loop the ego doesn't want you to escape. It whispers, "Stay here, it's familiar," even when familiarity hurts. It builds a comfort zone out of old wounds, but staying there isn't peace, it's paralysis. To grow, we must risk stepping beyond what the ego deems acceptable, into what is truly alive. That's why we argue over trivial things, only to end up wounded by ancient pain. The ego doesn't want you to let go of control, because doing so would threaten the story it has written about who you are. And yet, life has never truly been under its control. In nature, we see this truth clearly. The cheetah, for example, evolved to run faster than any other land animal. But this speed comes at a cost. Fragility. It makes the cheetah vulnerable, often unable to defend its young. Its extreme specialization became an evolutionary trap. Unlike the cheetah, humans are not bound by physical traits. We have a mind capable of imagining, adapting, and transforming. But that same mind can fall into its own trap, the ego. When you allow the ego to dictate your experience, you lose access to the fullness of being. You become trapped in small cycles, conflict, routine, control, and fear. You trade the infinite for the comfort of the known. And this is where the true act of liberation begins. You don't need more control. You need more awareness. The ego fears surrender, but you don't have to. You can choose to live from a wider space, where it's not the I that governs all, but the wholeness of your being, open to the present, free from the past. You've lived your life believing the I is in control, that it decides, thinks, acts. But what if I told you that this I never truly held the reins? The ego is like a trimmed-down map claiming to represent the entire territory. Its job has always been to keep your experience within a safe, familiar, limited zone. It decides which aspects of reality you may accept, which to reject, what emotions to feel, what thoughts to entertain. But human consciousness was meant for far more than that. Deepak Chopra puts it simply: the ego isn't your enemy, but it is a barrier. Its purpose is to edit life to make it feel manageable. But that editing comes at a cost. It separates us from wholeness. Have you ever found yourself in an argument with a partner that suddenly escalates into something far bigger? What begins as a disagreement about money, schedules, or household tasks ends up unearthing years of hidden resentment. In that moment, the ego isn't trying to resolve anything. It wants to win, to dominate, to protect its version of the story. And while that happens, what really matters is lost. Love, connection, the reason you're together. The same dynamic plays out on a global scale. 7 billion egos, each convinced it holds the truth, making decisions from a place of separation. That's how wars begin. That's how we damage the earth. That's how collective hatred thrives. The ego believes it can manage reality, but human history is a testament to its repeated failures. And the irony is this: while we believe we're in control, we don't even perceive what we truly are. We don't feel the quantum field from which all forms emerge. We don't sense the atoms that make up our bodies. We aren't even aware of how the brain, our own brain, functions. All of that lies beyond the ego's map. The truth is, you don't need to keep editing reality. You don't need to divide, judge, or control. Consciousness, in its pure state, doesn't fear the infinite. It belongs there. Letting go of the ego isn't losing yourself. It's finding yourself. It's moving beyond fragments and returning to the whole. The ego says, "You can't live without me." But consciousness replies, "I never needed limits to be what I am." Awakening doesn't mean becoming someone new. It means stripping away who you were never meant to be. It's not a spiritual achievement, but a homecoming to the space where you were always whole. To awaken is to remember this and to live from that space. And that concludes our video. If you enjoyed the content as much as we did, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future videos. And don't forget to turn on notifications to stay up to date with all our updates. Thanks for being part of our community. See you in the next video.